All right, welcome everyone. This is the community meeting and scoping meeting for the Premier on First mixed-use project. My name is Brian Foote. I work here in the planning division, and also this evening we have here other planning staff. We have the city's environmental consultant, Meridian Consultants, here this evening. We have the applicant, the Cusimano Real Estate Group, here this evening. There is an agenda for the meeting this evening. Briefly, I'll do introductions, and then the applicant will have a few minutes to do a presentation and tell us about the project description and briefly go over the project plans. Then we have Meridian Consultants to discuss the EIR process. EIR is Environmental Impact Report process. And again, this meeting tonight is a combined community meeting and scoping meeting. And Meridian Consultants will explain more about the scoping process. But the purpose of the scoping meeting is to gather comments on the scope of the analysis in the EIR. And then we'll open up the floor to questions and answers. The meeting tonight is being recorded on video and audio so that we can make the meeting available to the public via the website later. So you'll see me walking around with the mic. So please, if you have any questions, do raise your hand and I'll get to you as quickly as possible with the microphone. And hopefully that way we'll get to everybody. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to the Cusimano Real Estate Group. We have here this evening Michael Cusimano to tell you a little bit more about the project. And with that.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Michael Cusimano. I'm with the Cusimano Real Estate Group. And this is our second scoping meeting for the Premier on First project. We held a initial scoping meeting about 4 weeks ago. And so I will do basically the same thing I did at that meeting, which is just to make a very brief description of the project and then to answer whatever questions you may have. So the Premier on First project is located on First Street at the intersection of Verdugo on First between Verdugo and Tujunga. It is a two-phase project. The first phase is a 14-story high-rise residential project that is apartments with ground floor retail. The second phase will be either a 13-story hotel or a 12-story office building located on the intersection of First Street and Tujunga. The project is located in downtown Burbank on a site that is adjacent to the 5 freeway. It's a site that has been designated by the city of Burbank as high-density mixed use. It actually has the highest permitted density in the city of Burbank. Go back one just slide. And the reason for that is that this project is located on one of the sites that's most accessible to the Metrolink station. And so the city of Burbank, when they adopted the specific plan, the downtown specific plan, they designated this site as the highest density in the community based upon the accessibility to transit, the accessibility to the 5 freeway, and the accessibility to the Metrolink system. Thank you. Go ahead. So as I mentioned, the project is located in downtown. It's across the street from the Marriott Residence Inn, just down the street from the new Hilton Garden Inn that's under construction, adjacent to the existing Verdugo Towers, and next to the twin Holiday Inn Towers, which are each 20 stories in height. So this just shows you more of a close-up. The downtown Burbank area is one of the higher density neighborhoods in this community. One of the advantages of massing greater density in these areas is that it doesn't have the impact on single-family homes. So it doesn't, someone that lives here that needs to access either the train or the 5 freeway won't have to drive through neighborhoods. They won't have to drive through neighborhoods to reach places to shop, places of entertainment, or other places of transit. This is an aerial view, and you can see this is the site. This is Verdugo. This is the 5 freeway, and here's the Metrolink station just across. As I mentioned, the ground floor will include retail and a portico share. Parking for the residential project will be off Verdugo so that people will be able to exit off-site and then exit the site back onto Verdugo. The ground floor, as I said, will be retail. Loading is in the back off of the alley. At the podium level, the configuration is basically a C shape around. Am I doing that? Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I just get in trouble with pointers. Is a C shape around a central pool area. The second phase in this configuration shows the hotel, which also features a pool level at the podium level. The hotel also features a rooftop sky room, which will be a restaurant and/or banquet space. And the roof level of the residential tower will also feature a rooftop garden and rooftop open space. This is the cross-section that shows parking, 2 levels of subterranean parking for the residential project with 3 levels above the retail. With the hotel project, all of the parking is above the ground floor lobby. So again, this is a closer up version of the residential. This will be the first phase of the 2-phase project existing on the corner of First Street and Verdugo. It will be 154 units, 10,400 square feet of retail space. The parking that is provided for this project is completely compliant with code, and the project that we are proposing is also completely compliant with code. The second phase will be either, as I mentioned, either a hotel, which will consist of 230 rooms in approximately 146,000 square feet, will include ground level restaurants and retail, as well as the rooftop restaurant as well. The alternative for phase 2 would be an office building consisting of 147,000 square feet. So again, each of these projects has been designed to meet every aspect of the Burbank Code, the Burbank 2035 general plan. Because this project is in direct proximity to the Metrolink station, the Burbank 2035 municipal plan allows for a density bonus of up to 25% because of the proximity to transit. This project has not applied for the density bonus. Under Burbank 2035, it would be also entitled to apply for an exceptional project density bonus, and it has not applied for that density bonus either. So in summary, that is the project. We are moving through the entitlement process and through the environmental impact process, and I'm available to answer any questions anyone might have. Yes, sir.
I guess my concern is beyond this project, and densification doesn't necessarily mean this is a sustainable development. And I applaud you for giving us all the information on being compliant with code and not wanting the extra bonus. However, that doesn't mean it's thoughtful. My concern is the lack of open space in cumulative projects of high density. Parkport, County of Los Angeles, and in Burbank, packing people together around transit isn't exactly quality of life either. We don't have any open space, I noticed, that's either public or oriented toward the units themselves. So lack of passive and active recreation is absolutely non-existent here. And I know you're compliant. I guess it's a bigger question on my part as to why we keep doing this. Downtown LA does it, now we're a little version of downtown LA. That's more of a planning issue with the city. I'm on the Burbank, I'm a commissioner on the Burbank Sustainability Commission, and I yap about this all the time. It's a little out of control. I don't know how you get around that unless we have thoughtful developers who actually look at sustainability in a sustainable way for quality of life. We're packing people together around transit hubs all over the place, and I just don't feel it's looking at the quality of life that people should have. The other issue is the street edge and the walkability. We don't have a really good look at what the street edge is. Do you have another rendering or something that shows us what the experience is like at the street level?
Perhaps. Okay, which of these is the laser? Because when I the red. Okay. I'll talk about it, I think. Okay. Thank you for those comments. You raised some interesting points. You know, I guess some of the prevailing thinking about sustainability, I think, has been to mass greater density around transit because it allows people to not rely so much on the car.
Well, what do they do when they get home?
Well, again, I think that some of the thinking is that if you live in downtown Burbank, you can go to a restaurant, you can go shopping, you can go to the movies, and maybe not have to rely on your car. So now, on this particular project, we could have asked for a reduction in parking. A lot of people, if you go and you look at projects that are built in Pasadena or Los Angeles where they build right next to transit, they routinely go and ask that municipality to provide less parking on site under the argument that people are going to use transit, they won't need cars as much. And we could have applied for that here. We didn't. So we're providing full code parking because, believe it or not, we've actually listened to the public. We listened to the public talk about we need to have sufficient parking on site. And so we've provided that.
So it's still about the car.
Well, we certainly, I don't know, in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, if these parking spaces will be used to the extent that they are now. But they'll be here.
I understand all that, it's just the lack of open space that we're just cumulative, packing people together without passive and recreation, passive open space recreation, or just green space.
So let me just talk a little bit about that. If you look at the setbacks here, this is the building line here of what the ground floor space. So if there actually is a bit more walkability here than in many projects that are built at the ground level right out to the sidewalk. So as I said, you've got this portico share where people will be able to come in and park. So I understand. I understand that in the perfect world, we would have lots and lots and lots of open space, private open space, public open space. But if you want to be able to have density, and if you want to be able to put this number of people in this space, you can't have those types of open space. Now, again, the argument might be, well, you don't need to put 154 units. Maybe you only need to put 10 units. Well, at 10 units, it doesn't get built. So, but anyway, I actually do appreciate the comments about sustainability. This particular project, as I mentioned, has the rooftop garden. Also, all of the rainwater that rains on this, right now it's a parking lot, okay? So all the rainwater falls in that parking lot, runs to a catch basin, goes into the storm drain, and goes out into the ocean somewhere, right? All the rainwater that's captured here will go into a cistern and be either reused at the project or infiltrated down into the ground. So it won't be going into the ocean. So there are some aspects that we look at this to try and incorporate better, more sustainable design. And I'm sure you know what all those issues are of LED lighting and solar power and solar water heating. Those sorts of things allow these types of projects on a unit-by-unit basis to be more sustainable than the things that we built 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Just what we do today, though.
Yep.
Michael, it might be worthwhile to mention this, sir.
This is Daniel Jivnovsky. He's the project architect.
You know, it's interesting you bring up a lifestyle issue. And I'm doing work downtown, and we're doing this here. And what we're finding is the young people want to live in a building just like this. They don't want a house. The idea being, you see that purple area? That's a gymnasium. This is where they're going to recreate. There's a pool deck. There are gardens around the podium level. On the ground floor, what we're contemplating is a coffee shop, a cleaners, maybe a Trader Joe's. They live in these buildings and they never leave because they work 24/7. This is the life of the younger generation.
Well, they need a place to go out, be in the open space. I'm not arguing, I'm an architect too, so I get your.
But you know,
I get
it's a
your
surprise to
description
me.
of this.
It's a
It's just
surprise
not
to me.
answering my question.
They like living in these kind of buildings.
They also like to get out. The problem is they get, never mind.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment. Thank you.
It's just a.
Thank you.
I appreciate the architect's comment. I'm going to respectfully disagree with it because I work with these young people. And I work with several companies in Northern California and in New York and in Europe. And there is that impression in the established architectural and development world that these young people, some people call them millennials, or startup business owners, or whatever you want to call them, want to live in these self-enclosed, hermetically sealed environments where they can live, work, recreate and everything without ever having to go out. What these millennials or young people want is the convenience of being able to adapt to their life or work needs as the case might arise. They would love to be able to get out of the space they live in, but they want the ability to choose to work there one day or go to another location easily another day or get out and recreate outside of the space. They want the flexibility and the fluidity, which is a challenge to you as architects and developers. And I appreciate very much what the Kusumana Group does in trying to accommodate some of these things as their developments arise. The challenge and opportunity that I would propose to you is that you are at the forefront of this paradigm shift where we're looking at urbanization. It's an inevitability. As we all know, 81% of Americans live in cities, and it's going to grow to a certain degree. There was this sense that people were all going to move to the suburbs when they retired. Not happening. So we're not just looking at millennials, we're also looking at retired groups. And the question I ask of you is, how are you going to address the very worthy question that Mr. Smith made, which is, as these developments manifest themselves, how are you going to integrate the need to have them be sustainable, not just environmentally, but fiscally and infrastructurally, so that 20 years from now, we're not tearing the whole thing down and rebuilding something new, like other commercial realty groups are having to do in Burbank and elsewhere, because they built something that responded to the perceived needs of that particular time and responded to the code needs of that time, but did not anticipate or foresee the evolving needs 10, 20, 30 years down the road, if you could, and maybe it's too late for this, I don't know, because I'm coming in late, but if you could take the time to sit down with people like the Sustainability Commission, like those millennial business owners that I work with, and say, what do you think your business will be needing when it goes beyond 5 people and is 25 people? And what do you think the spin-off that you have, or the 5 spin-offs that you have, will want, where your employees who now live in this space but now want to set up their own business, and there's 2 of them, but they want to have a live work space and they want an incubator, etc. What are the sorts of concepts you're perceiving will evolve over the next 10, 20 years, so that you can incorporate some of that into this, so that for your own fiscal ROI, you're developing something that's going to give you revenue generation 30, 40 years down the road, instead of you having to inject another $30 million into something 10 years down the road?
Michael, do you want to respond to that? And then we'll move to part 2 of the presentation.
I appreciate that input. When we build projects and properties like this, we try to think ahead and think of what that demand will be. Things like charging stations are small little things, and there's not a return on investment now because there's not enough electric cars. But in order to estimate where demand's going to be in 30 years from now, you have to upsize the electrical system, because it will be a major component probably of what demand is going to be. So we are trying to think in advance of those things, and to include the type of amenities that will be attractive to people that are renting now, and in 5 years, and in 10 years from now. So again, things like that we're doing in our projects, like solar power and solar water heating, we're using what's the state of the art today. Now, that may evolve in 5 or 10 or 15 years, but hopefully in a project like this, as new technologies are available, we'll be able to incorporate those. But I certainly appreciate the input.
Just, I don't want to, but the point I think Mr. Smith is making is, you will have tenants live here for those many years if they find themselves being integrated into the community. If they see themselves being tenants only of this particular structure, it'll be easy for them to go to another structure at another point, because they will only see this as a resource rather than part of their lifestyle. And if it's not connected to the community in some functional way, it is just a place where they sleep, maybe work, maybe come for a hotel, but there's no loyalty on their part, because there's no loyalty on your part to the community, where you connect the resident to the community. That's what I'm saying.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
My name's Mike Crown, and I'm here representing ownership for the Holiday Inn Burbank, which is across the street from your second phase.
Yes.
I'll make no bones about it. I don't like that project, and it's for vested interest. I already find myself in a position where I have the Residence by Marriott, myself, the New Spring Hill, and now the Hilton Gardens. When I grew up, a gas station of an oil company would build a gas station on one corner, then another oil company on the other, and pretty soon you'd have 4 gas stations on one corner. And none of them did more business as they did that. They all did less, and they just spread it around. We are all already fighting each other for business. Our rates are lower than they should be. And we had a tower that was permitted right across the street from your phase 2 for 154 units, and it did not build because it made no economic sense. Now you've got even more. I got no problem with your first phase. I have a serious problem with your second phase, building that many hotel rooms, because all it's going to do is, if you run it, manage it, own it, you're going to find out what it is to try to spread a dollar between 5 hotels. It doesn't work. So I got no problems with your project. I got no problems with the office space. I got a big problem with the proposed hotel portion of it. And obviously I'll respond in writing to the Planning Commission.
Good, thank you. So I can appreciate the concern that you have, and one of the reasons that we are applying for 2 potential uses in the second phase is that the markets change, and I appreciate that. A project like this takes a long time. We've been working on this project for a long time. We anticipate having the entitlement done by the end of this year. It's another year or 2 to complete the plans, and another several years for construction. And so those things change, and those markets change over time. Now, right now, the hospitality market is very strong. That's why you're seeing so many other hotel operators wanting to come into this area, because the numbers work. Whether that's the case in 2 years from now or 4 years from now, I don't know. And that's one of the reasons that we've included the alternative use, which is traditional office space.
Well, I look at the STAR report, the 360, I look at my books, and other than certain times like the Porter Ranch influx, believe me, you can go talk to people at Marriott, the Courtyard, us, these other hotels. It's stronger than it was in 9, 10, 11, but it's not, we're not lacking room space, trust me.
I agree, and there has to be a balance. People are concerned about growth, but they're also concerned about the economic welfare of their community, and I agree that there needs to be a balance between those two. A couple of weeks ago, there were the budget projections for the city of Burbank, and for, was it 2020, Brian, did you watch that, the budget forecast? That Burbank is going to be in a serious budget shortfall. That is, the amount of money that we spend on pensions and police and fire and public works and parks and recs will cost more than what we generate in revenue. And so the city needs to generate revenue, but I think it needs to do so in a responsible way. And there needs to be a balance between residential growth, commercial growth, job growth, hotel growth, and retail growth, so that those systems can work compatibly together, as opposed to having an oversupply of one or the other. And so, hopefully that can occur.
I've been in your position, I don't envy it, but I believe at this point that would be overkill with the number of rooms. We're looking at adding something in our backyard, so to speak, and I can assure you it's not those kind of room numbers by any means, because the numbers don't pencil.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Hey, Mr. Cusmano, Tony Nuggs here. You had mentioned that you weren't building this next to a neighborhood, and for once, that's greatly appreciated, but you did do it with the Talaria, so it kind of is meaningless at this point, because it's like, where will your next project be? We just don't know yet, right? Exactly. What was that about electric cars that you said? I misunderstood you, I think. Are the electrical upgrades of the building because of electrical cars?
I'm saying that these buildings will be designed to provide car charging stations, where buildings that we built in the past 5, 10, 15 years ago didn't have those capabilities.
So you're anticipating future use of automobiles?
Yes.
Okay. You said 150, and as a juxtaposition to that, you are 154, is that the amount?
Yes.
As opposed to 10, well, that's quite a spread, but how about 100 units? Why not? No ROI? Not enough ROI? Why not?
Well, I like this design. I think that this is a design that meets the needs of this community, and if I thought that 100 units was the best size for this and the most efficient project, then that's what we would have proposed.
I would love for you to lay out line item by line item those needs that you feel benefits me, because I'm part of this community. Do you still live here?
No, I don't.
You keep talking about the railroad as the bone as to why we should allow this and that it meets code and all of that, but you know what? When it comes to private corporations putting in residential care units, they could buy up a block of homes, but does that make it right? Does that make it the right thing to do for our community? They have that right to do that, Mr.
I'm not sure I
Cusmano.
understand the point.
I'm saying just because you can do it doesn't make it right, doesn't mean you should do it, given all the criteria, all the other trade-offs that we're going to experience as a result of overdensity, just like with Talaria. That's what I'm saying. So the railroad to nowhere thing, I mean, it's a great idea. We know it's coming. We know we need more mass transportation, but right now we got 3 legs, right? One to Lancaster, dead ends, one deadheads to Ventura, one deadheads at Union Station. Am I correct on that? All of those, when they stop, they only stop at one time at each city. And I don't even think they hit all cities, but the cities that do stop, it's just one time. So in your projections, how long is it going to take before that's actually effective? Because you're using that to justify the people and the space and the units that you're building. So you got a study on that that shows how long it's going to take to really max out to justify why you were able to use that to get the overbuild that you're doing?
So I guess that if we were applying for a density bonus because of the access to transit, that would be a good point. But as I mentioned, we're not applying
No, that's
for a density
I'm sorry,
bonus.
that's a straw argument. I'm not talking about the density bonus. You're hitting maximum code prior to the density bonus. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you're maxing out, just not with that exceptional density bonus. So once again, but you didn't answer my question. So if the railroad's really not accommodating, if the metro's really not accommodating this justification of what you're using it for, when do you perceive that happening? 20 years from now? When you've been quoted as saying people won't be in their cars, even though you're preparing for people to use cars at your place?
So I guess if your point is that people aren't using transit and won't use transit in the future, I just
No,
don't
that's
know-
not my point. That's not what I said. That's not what I asked. Once again, let me try it again. When you are using the metro line as justification for maxing out your build to code, not bonus density, but code, how long do you think, based on your projections, your people, it's going to be before that justification is realized? Because right now, I don't see it realized. I don't see people using that metro. Do you take the metro to work here every day?
Actually, I have frequently as well, and I think it works just great.
Really? How long does it take you? How often do you do it?
It usually takes about 20 minutes.
From Malibu?
No, I have another home in Chatsworth that I commute to.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So
So
and
you have
actually, it's
options
very-
there.
I do, and it's
And
very,
if you don't
very
take the train, you still
accessible.
need that automobile because you don't live down the street from where you work. So, good deal. But, so, once again, on the metro, it's a work in progress, I'll give them that, but it's decades away to fulfill what you're basing why to overbuild now, or maximum build, excuse me, let me rephrase that, correct?
I think that when we're going to build, as I said, to build density around transit makes sense. Now, of course, we could say, you know what, we're just not going to build at all. And that's another alternative. But if we're going to build and we're going to absorb the growth that's going to happen in this community, you could either do it near transit or you can do it away
Well,
from transit.
here's where you're building, and as a juxtaposition, you say not building at all. I understand those mindsets. I have sales training as well, sir. What about somewhere in between? That's what we're all talking about here. That's what we're all concerned with. Because we already see the traffic, we already see the density, we already know it's coming. So why can't you do somewhere in between? How much is enough?
So that's a good point. So we could have come in and we could have asked for the density bonus that's provided for. We could have brought in 200 units and then said, okay, well, we'll cut it down to 150. What we're bringing in is a project that meets code, that meets the density that was projected for this site. Now, this same site in other cities, in Glendale, in Hollywood, in West Los Angeles, would be significantly greater in density. And we brought in what we think is the right size project. So, and I absolutely agree that you can disagree.
If I could just add, we may not have all of the answers here tonight, but again, part of this meeting is an EIR scoping meeting, so we heard questions or comments about open space and parking. Some of that preliminary data is already available in the initial study, which is out for public review right now. Other questions or comments about metro ridership projections or transit projections, we may not have that detailed data tonight, but that's something that can certainly be submitted as a comment or a written comment, and we can take a closer look at it as part of the EIR process.
I'd like to add one more thing on transit. Cusimano's, in justifying this bill, they're also talking about how millennials are not wanting to buy cars. Well, I'm sure that's true because they can't afford it with the outrageous college loans nowadays. But the fact of the matter is they are buying cars. They're up 9%. This is a study out of the Washington Post, or excuse me, out of Bloomberg. They're up 9% than last year. So that's a myth as well.
Okay, I see some hands going up. We can take questions now, or we also have our EIR consultant, the city's EIR consultant, available here tonight to briefly explain the environmental process and the scoping process. So if your questions are about the project description, we can try and answer it right now. Yeah. We can wait for questions after the environmental part of the presentation, or,
You know, there's a lot going on in Burbank right now. You know, the First and Magnolia project, and then the, you know, upcoming redevelopment of the IKEA site. And they seem to be developed like individually, and as Nicholas said, kind of each one is hermetically sealed, you know, like a block, and you have secured access. And there's no open space, there's no green space for people to go and relax and walk their dogs. And I know that the people in Burbank really, the small town feel is real important to them. And I know that's just not a tangible thing, but I think there's still some of that left. And I know that this is a little denser than, a lot denser than what they want. And if everybody could get together, you know, you and First and Magnolia, and then the potential development of the IKEA site, because we're just stacking people on top of people. And a resident made a very good point at the First and Magnolia project that he lives in the collection, and there are 7 vacant retail spaces. That, I haven't counted them, I'm just quoting what he said. And do we really need that much retail space? And he was very concerned because his view is going to be gone. And, you know, I mean, there's that, do you stop a project because of one person's view? But it is kind of like sitting in a theater with a giant hat on. I just think if we could be more considerate, if every development could be more considerate of what's going in, what people want, I think we would just be a whole lot more successful, and there would be, you know, more acceptance. Because nobody is putting in open space. Everybody's the same, a block, you know, hermetically sealed. You go in, you're not connected to anything, and that's important to the people of Burbank. That small town feel, the community feel. And it's, none of these projects has it.
next question or comment? Let me get you raise your hand first.
Could you
Get you on
go to the
recorder,
slide that
please.
shows the site plan? Are you recording? Could you go to the slide that shows the site plan of this? I took one off the internet 2 weeks ago, and it's dated July 2015. No, the one that shows the parking, the list of parking and everything. Yes, that one. Yeah, okay. It says it requires 473 spaces, and that's what you're providing. But that one line, existing office to Hungan First, you're borrowing 120 spaces from the lot next door? What is that 120? Where is it?
No, actually, we're loaning it to that building next door. So we're providing extra parking so that there's sufficient parking for all the uses on the block.
So those 120 spaces are going to be connected with the hotel?
Now, the 120 spaces,
Or are they underneath the apartments?
they're under the apartments. Or above the or under the apartments, but above the lobby and retail levels.
Oh, so it's included in the building? I
Yes.
just was curious how you're moving 120
Now,
spaces over.
actually, if we can go to the cross-section and then come back to this, it might be a little bit easier for me to illustrate. Right there.
Oh, yeah,
See the parking above?
okay. But I don't understand the borrowing from another lot, that's all. I
Well,
can
we
design,
look-
I can understand just designing in those
We
spaces you
look at it
need.
as being one project.
Oh.
And so instead of just building on the on the parking lot on the corner of First and Verdugo and leaving the overall project with a deficit of parking, we're providing sufficient parking so that there's always going to be enough parking even before the second phase is built. So we're actually overbuilding the parking for the first phase, which is one of the reasons that there's less parking in the second phase, because we're spending more money and building more parking in the first phase, so there will always be enough parking.
So the people that go to this hotel or office, whatever it is, can park in the other one?
Yes.
If they had to? So it's
Yeah,
communal parking for everybody?
So for the hotel, we envision that the employees will park there, and in the office, yeah, that's where they'll park. There's actually an elevator system that connects those exclusively for the adjacent building.
Okay, I was just a little confused
Yeah,
about that.
that's
Thank you.
Good
Thank you.
question.
Questions, sir?
Yeah. Hi, Mike,
How are you?
and thank you for the presentation. I really enjoy the thought you put into the building and the impact in the area. Now, I understand it's going up on the area right now, there's virtually nothing there except for parking, correct?
That's correct.
When I was reading the first report, though, I had something kind of jumped out at me, and I need you to clarify that not being an architect, oh, I'm sorry. I'm Dr. Albert Schlegel. I'm president of BAYCOD, a Burbank Advisory Council on Disabilities, and I'm on the board of directors for the Burbank Housing Corporation. What did I say the first time? I get confused who I am. But I saw a concern on liquefaction in the area because that's a known liquefaction area. And how are you going to mitigate that?
Yeah, that's actually one of the purposes of the environmental impact report, is that every aspect, I'm sure that the EIR consultant can speak to that, but all the soils issues will be thoroughly investigated, all of the historical, archaeological, greenhouse gases. So maybe that's a better question, but that is certainly one of the, I don't know, dozen or so items that will be closely scrutinized.
All right. I heard everybody, I heard Tony talk, I heard Susan talk. I'm sorry, I don't know the other gentleman's name, and the gentleman for Holiday Inn. And something presented it to me, something presented in my mind. And as everybody knows, traffic in Burbank is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And I'm a big advocate of Metrolink, and I use it all the time. And Tony, we actually have 2 Burbank Metrolink stops here in the city, and they're in the process of putting in a 3rd one. 2 down by the airport, and then one we know downtown, and we should bring Amtrak back downtown. But what impact are you going to have on the Verdugo traffic, the First Street traffic, the San Fernando traffic, and the Olive traffic in 2 phases? One, during construction, and number 2, once completed?
Yeah, so those are really, really good questions. And one of the reasons for the environmental impact report is that traffic studies will be done, traffic models will be projected, not by us, but by the consultant that was hired by the city to ascertain all of those things. And so rather than have us do a study and come here and try and sell it to you, the city, through this process, hires their own environmental consultant that will undertake all that. And then we'll see, just like the public will. We think that this area in downtown Burbank, with its access to transit, to its access to the freeway, will be able to absorb this. But the city's not going to have to rely on our assumptions. They will have a full-blown environmental impact report with a full-blown traffic study that will analyze that.
So what you're actually saying is I'm ahead of the game on this.
Well, what we did is that when we first talked to the city about this, there were 2 ways to look at it. This project is code compliant. It complies with Burbank 2035. We could have made the argument that we're going to come into the city and maybe not do an environmental impact report, but we never ever considered that. And so from day one, when we started meeting with the city, we said, let's go ahead and do the environmental impact report. Of course, it's very expensive and we have to pay for it. And it's a long and lengthy process, which is why we're here. But we said from the beginning, we really need everyone to understand what the impacts are going to be. And if there are impacts that need to be mitigated, how do you mitigate them? And maybe it's, at a specific intersection right in front of the project. Maybe it's at an intersection 15 blocks away. But we don't know that until the in-depth study is done. So, yeah, all things that need to be studied and things that will be studied as a part of this process.
All right, so I'm thinking down the road as opposed to here, so I will wait and see how that develops. And on that particular corner, I'm just figuring out, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bus stops on that corner for,
Isn't that great?
well,
There's lots of access.
there's incredible access, and most people prefer to walk. Well, as you can see, I don't walk, but I scooter over there. Now, and I'm going to save some of the other questions I had. One was the impact it would have on BMP because of your water, but I absolutely got excited when I heard you are going to recycle your water into a cistern, so it's not going to be lost.
Not going to be lost. It will either be reused for irrigation. It can't be used in a potable way. No matter, when you catch it there, the technology doesn't really exist in this type of a project to actually pipe it back through into
Too
your
bad.
sink. Well, someday maybe. But the water will either be captured in a tank and used for irrigation or put back into the groundwater table. But none of it will leave the site.
So it will not, I think that's wonderful. Now, are we talking rainwater or usage water?
Rainwater.
What about usage water?
Usage water goes into the Burbank sanitary sewer system, which goes through its own recycling process, which is what creates the gray water that is available to the public to use.
All right. And I heard a lot of talk about the millennials. And that's great and that's wonderful, but you know what? I'm a baby boomer. And well, I am.
I'm beyond a baby boomer, so
Yeah, I don't know what was before baby boomers.
the silent generation.
Yeah, they're silent. All right. Now, the residences, you're going to be renting an apartment. Are you looking forward to anywhere those becoming condos and you're selling them to people? And then we have sustainable residences there as opposed to people that, because we know that rentals, I don't know what the statistics are, but rentals are not long-term. Well, some are, but a lot of them aren't. Where if a person buys, it's a whole different game.
So, I guess different people have different perceptions of, condominiums versus apartments. And some people think that condominiums are superior, and some think that rentals are superior because it's under, I guess, maybe unified management. The fact of the matter is that we don't do condos. We only do apartments. And so, in some instances, it may be more desirable to have condominiums because it allows home ownership, but it's just not what our business is. We focus on the business that we know and not that we don't.
Well, Susan mentioned as you see, I don't need the mic, but Susan mentioned I take one demerit. Sharon, who I actually know and is the Secretary of BACOT, indicated that Burbank does have a small town feel, and we love that. And that's one of the major attractions to me. I refer to it as the Burbank vortex. You get here, it's hard to get out.
Right.
Because we love it. But all of these hermetically sealed communities kind of turns us into a cellular community, and I don't know what the interaction is, and I understand this is off the, this is off the subject, but are you planning or do you see anything where that will interact?
I guess what we envision is a place where people live and walk and go to restaurants and interact in a way that is maybe more cosmopolitan. Where people don't necessarily think about getting into their car every time they want to go somewhere, and you can do that when you live in a downtown. Now, if you live 3 blocks above 6th Street, the idea of walking to a coffee shop or walking to a restaurant, you better be able to put some miles on because it's not practical. But by living here, you can walk to Gordon Biersch, you can walk to Volcano, you can walk to Story Tavern. So our thinking is that people that will be attracted to live here are going to want to live here because it has a bunch of amenities that are really attractive to them, and the ability to, enjoy the nightlife, the entertainment, flappers, be able to, go out and have a beer and not have to get in your car because you live 4 blocks away. We think that people will find that attractive. I mean, look at, we would be crazy to design a building that we didn't think would have a lot of appeal to the market. And part of the appeal that we see of being in a downtown is all the amenities. That, that you can walk to Gordon Biersch, you can walk to all these places, you can walk to the movie theaters. I mean, that's not hype or sales, that's reality, and that's how well-planned downtowns are evolving. And we think that potential exists here.
Well, I agree with you, and I see downtown Los Angeles, that is their trend now, and they're building high-rise condos and everything else, and they're redesigning downtown Los Angeles. And granted, that's on a much larger scale, but...
well, yeah, but...
And that's where I said the part about mugging. I didn't mean mugging in Burbank. I'm proud of our safety in this city.
But one thing to consider, so when you go to those areas in downtown where you stand out in front of those hotels, or excuse me, those apartments, you see people come out and they're walking up and down the streets. Those are built at a much greater density than this is. And so I think that there is that potential, and I think that there are people that will work in industries that are ingrained in Burbank, that work in the entertainment industry, that now, maybe drive to Hollywood or downtown Los Angeles and places like that because this type of living doesn't exist in Burbank. Maybe they can, live in downtown Burbank, and maybe there's a demand for that. We think it is, or we wouldn't propose it.
Could I just tag on this? Just very quickly, it'll be 30 seconds only. You're saying two very compelling arguments, but they're contradictory, and I'd love to find out which one you're most interested in. On the one hand, you're speaking about complying with current code and responding to current perceived living requirements. And on the other hand, you're talking about emerging trends in livability. And the two are not mutually exclusive, but they oppose each other to a certain degree. So you're building all of this parking, and you're talking about the ability to drive here and drive to other places and commute. So you're looking at this as being a commuter center. And then you're talking about people getting out of their car and living and working in the environment. The two are not, they don't live symbiotically. They're actually oppositional. So either you're going to encourage one or the other, and I'd love to get your responses to which is most important to you. Are you trying to build a place that is going to integrate with the community, encourage pedestrianism, bicycling, public transportation use and the like, and encourage people to move in here who are going to be part of the emerging trend, which is to no longer have a car or not use that as the main mode of transportation, which is currently 78% of the population using it for transport of 1 mile or less? Or are you going to cater to that population, which is declining, and say, well, that's what it is today, so that's what we're going to cater to? It's one or the other, I would suggest. Which is most important to you in this development?
Well, it's very insightful, actually. And I think my response is that as much as we would like to commit to a project that is completely forward-thinking, that type of project is not realistic in Burbank today. I think that we try to find a fine line that bridges the two. If we were to come in here, if we were truly being forward-thinking and thinking about 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, we would come in here with more density and a lot less parking, and because that's probably what the developments of the longer-term future will be. That's not going to be accepted in Burbank today, and it probably doesn't meet the demands of a lot of the Burbank residents of today that still rely on the car. So when you say they're not mutually exclusive, I agree. They're difficult because they are different. What we're trying to do is to bridge the gap between the two, to design a project that meets codes, because that's reality today. I mean, the other alternative is to do a project that is very, very forward-thinking, and it probably doesn't happen in Burbank today. But can we also include some of those elements that will continue to make it attractive for maybe a non-traditional Burbank resident and the emerging demand of what people will be attracted to in 5-10 years from now.
Okay, well, let's continue with questions in just a minute. There is another part to this presentation that I would really like to get to because I'm hearing comments and questions about some environmental topics, and we do have the city's environmental consultant here this evening just to tell you a little bit about the EIR process and how that will become involved with some of the items that you're mentioning here tonight. So I'd like to introduce Tony Locacciato from Meridian Consultants.
Thank you, Brian. Brian asked me to cover a couple things for you tonight. What's the environmental review process consist of that the city's conducting for this project? And based on preliminary review, and we'll talk about that in a minute, what has the city already identified that is going to be studied in this EIR? And then we'll talk about the process and your opportunity to comment on what else you'd like the city to address in this EIR. So first, we have a state law, the California Environmental Quality Act. It requires the city to conduct environmental review of any project that involves discretionary approval actions. The City Council has to approve some requested actions before this project could be approved. So our state law has several objectives. First, we want to encourage decisions that are informed about environmental effects and environmental consequences. That's the purpose of the state law. How do you encourage those informed decisions? You identify ways to minimize or avoid the significant environmental effects of a project by studying them. Other goals of our state process are to increase the public's understanding of the process. That's part of holding this evening's meetings. Enhance public participation in the review process. We'll talk about how this meeting fits into that tonight and other opportunities for you throughout this process to participate. And last, we adopted this state law to promote coordination between different governmental agencies because there was a time when Caltrans didn't know what was being proposed in the city of Burbank, the county of Los Angeles didn't, there wasn't a lot of coordination. This is a simplified diagram that shows you the process. First, when the city receives an application for a project like this, they conduct preliminary review to determine what level of environmental review is required. In the back, we have copies of this preliminary review document. It's called an initial study. It's also available for you to review on the city's website. So the city conducted this preliminary review to determine if this project could result in significant effects on the environment. If the potential for significant effects are identified, then you study them further in an environmental impact report. That's what the city has determined in this case. So next we move down. The next step is this EIR scoping process we're in now. There was a notice of preparation of an environmental impact report prepared, circulated to other public agencies like Caltrans, the county, all neighboring cities, to give them an opportunity to provide the city comments on, hey, here are potential environmental effects we'd like you to study in the EIR. These scoping meetings are also held to provide an opportunity for comments on the potential environmental effects of the project. We have some comment forms here this evening. We'll go over that in a few minutes, how you can provide those comments to the city in written form so they're reflected in this process. After the city receives all those comments, they'll make a final determination of what should be studied in the EIR, and they'll set us and our team to work. We'll be preparing that draft environmental impact report. After a draft EIR is prepared, state law requires, that it be available for 45 days for public review. So when that EIR is prepared, it's going to be hard copies available here at the city, in your public libraries. It'll be available online for you to look at. You can review the whole document and submit written comments on the information, analysis, and conclusions about the environmental effects of the project. The city will also hold a public meeting during that 45-day period where you can come and make comments on the information, the analysis, and the conclusions of the draft environmental impact report. You could submit written comments. Once that 45-day review period is over, a written response is provided to every written comment submitted on the EIR from public agencies, from residents of Burbank. That is compiled into a final environmental impact report. Then, the city's planning board will review the environmental impact report in the project before making recommendations to the city council. What state law requires is that the city council certify the EIR as being prepared in accordance with state law, representing the city's independent objective opinions about the environmental effects of the project. That EIR has to be certified by the city council before they can then consider whether or not to approve this project. Okay, well. If you can go back to. Okay. Great. Thank you. When the draft EIR comes out, this is just an overview of the basic information that will be in it. First, there'll be a complete description of the project. The information that was presented tonight will have additional information for both the first phase and the second phase. There'll be a description of the existing environmental and physical conditions on the site in the surrounding area. Then analysis of the potential environmental impacts. For any impact identified as potentially significant, we'll be looking at what are feasible ways to lessen or avoid that impact entirely. Those are called mitigation measures. We'll identify those in the EIR. The last, something that was brought up earlier, there will be another way EIRs provide information on ways to avoid or lessen impacts on the environment is to study a reasonable range of alternatives to the project. That could include a 100-unit project. There'll be a reasonable range of alternatives identified. Those will be studied. There'll be comparative evaluation. Would that alternative result in avoid a significant impact? Would it substantially lessen it? Would it just incrementally lessen it? So we'll be providing that information in the EIR for everybody to see and your planning board and city council. Now, based on this preliminary review and this initial study you can review, these are the topics already identified for analysis. So the draft EIR will address aesthetic impacts. That'll be changes to the visual character of this site and the surrounding area. And one thing I want to mention for each of these topics, because it was brought up earlier, state law requires that an EIR not just solely focus on the impacts of this project by itself, but on potential cumulative effects of this project and all other related projects in the area. So the city recently approved the new IKEA store at the other end of First Street. Other projects were mentioned here this evening. We'll have a list of all those related projects, and the potential combined effects of those projects will be looked at. So the EIR will look at the impacts of the first phase of this project, which is the proposed residential project. For the second phase, we're going to examine the effects, since the request is to allow either hotel or office uses in that second building. We'll be looking at the impacts of both. Then, in addition to looking at the impacts of that phase 1 residential, phase 2 hotel, or phase 2 office, we'll look at the combined effects of the whole project with all the other projects that are being considered in the city in the general area. So that's the analysis you'll see for each one of these topics. So first, aesthetics. What's the change in the visual character of this site and the surrounding area from this and the other projects proposed? Air quality. We'll be doing quantified emissions modeling following the directives of the South Coast Air Quality Management District for each and every emission category that's regulated in our regional air quality management plan. We'll be looking at that for both what will happen temporarily during construction of the project, what happens when you build and occupy this project and use it long term. So we'll be looking throughout for each of these topics also, temporary construction impacts and the effects of phase 1 and phase 2 as proposed. Cultural resources, be looking at the potential, since there'll be some excavation of the site for those subterranean parking levels, what's the potential to impact archaeological resources, paleontological resources. There's an existing building on the site that's of sufficient age. We'll be checking to make sure that wouldn't have any historic resource value. Geology and soils. As mentioned earlier, there is potential for some of the existing geologic and soil effects to impact the project, so there'll be a complete geotechnical study done that will look at what's the potential for liquefaction. What are feasible ways to design the building, design the building to mitigate liquefaction impacts. Greenhouse gas emissions, a new topic, thank you. which just added for evaluation a few years ago in the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. We'll be looking at what are the greenhouse gas emissions from construction and occupancy and use of the project long-term. Now, the city, as part of the Burbank 2035 General Plan, actually adopted a greenhouse gas reduction program. So we'll be analyzing the consistency of the project as proposed with all the requirements in the city's newly adopted greenhouse gas reduction program. The city adopted this program to make sure that the city, new development in the city, contributes its fair share towards meeting our statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals we have. So we'll be looking at the consistency of this project with that plan. Land use planning relates to some of the comments I heard earlier. Cities adopted the Burbank 2035 General Plan. It consists of numerous elements of the general plan. We'll be looking at the consistency of this project with each element of the city's adopted Burbank 2035 General Plan. That's where you look at the larger picture. For example, the city has a park planning standard per 1,000 residents. We'll be reporting on how many acres of parks there are in the city now, how many acres of parks are in the city per 1,000 residents, how will that standard be met in the future with this and the other projects proposed. So that will be addressed in the document. Noise. We'll be looking at temporary construction noise impacts and permanent changes in noise from changes in traffic patterns and the occupancy and use of the project. Transportation and traffic. The city has traffic impact analysis guidelines. A separate consultant has been retained and is working under the direction of the city's Public Works and Planning Department to study the potential traffic effects of this project and, again, the cumulative effects, this and other related projects. And they're also using the Burbank 2035 traffic model that looks at the potential impacts if all the uses allowed by the city's general plan are built out. So that'll be a comprehensive analysis of all the intersections in the area. Utilities and service system. We'll be looking at the impacts on the city's water infrastructure, including the pipes that need to get the water to this site. Do they have capacity? We'll be looking at the impact on the city's water supplies based on the city's urban water management plan, which contains 20-year projections for the amount of water needed in the city. Sewer. What is the impact on sewer mains that serve the site? What lines will need to be upgraded? What are the impacts of constructing those lines? What's the capacity at the treatment plant to treat the sewage from this project and all the other projects the city's looking at? I'll be looking at energy use and the impacts on electric and natural gas infrastructure serving this site, to look at the capacities and the impacts of constructing any needed facilities. So these are topics the city's already identified to be analyzed in the EIR. The last, as I mentioned earlier, CEQA guidelines require every EIR to contain a reasonable range of alternatives to the project. That range is determined based on the significant impacts identified, because the purpose is to identify other ways to lessen or avoid any significant impacts to the project. But to the extent you have suggestions on alternatives you'd like the city to study, those would be great comments to submit to the city. So the purpose of this part of the meeting is to receive input on the environmental effects of the project you feel may be significant, if we haven't already discussed them, that you suggest the city study in the environmental impact report. You could submit written comments to the city's planning division. Genevieve Sharrow's in the back. She's managing the environmental review process on this project for the city. Those comments can go to her. They can be emailed to Genevieve at her email address, and you can get that in the back. And the city's accepting these comments through April 13th. So you don't have to make comments here tonight. You can take one of the comment forms, or you can provide written comments and email them or mail them to the city through April 13th. And the city's also put the web address up where you can find information on this project, this initial study document I've discussed a few times, other information on the environmental review process. And I'll leave this slide up so you can copy this information, or you can get this information in the back if you want to submit comments. So again, at this point, Brian's going to take over again. We're interested in hearing comments you have on the potential environmental effects of the project you'd like to see the city address in the EIR. Brian.
Thank you, Tony. I see a couple hands up. I believe, let's see.
My question didn't have to do with the EIR, so.
Okay. We can come back to your question later then if,
Be happy.
okay, we'll do that. Quick question or?
Quick question? No such thing. Tony, why not backwards? Couple of questions real quick. The water, we're coming off the worst 3 years of drought in American history. So why are we allowing maximum build? I know Mr. Cusmano likes to say, well, we're not getting the 25%. It's pointless when you're maximizing already at coming off the 3 worst years of water with no guarantee. Are computer models out there showing us that we're going to have a plethora of water coming in or not? Are we just going to kick the can down the road like we do with our traffic? My question to you as well, either one of you, about that, the water, the second part of that is we've seen as citizens that these traffic models, these traffic studies are woefully inadequate. It's based on perhaps decades-old methodologies, is it not, Tony? When we see the Costco, when we see Hollywood Way and Alameda, when we see what 6 videos showed about the traffic already around the bloated Tularia project, and that the mitigation was going to simply be some restriping and maybe a left-hand turn lane. We'll figure it out when we get there. That's not good planning. So how do we know that we have more foresight, more precise, more precision in these studies that you're going to show us between water and traffic? Last thing on that, though, if you have time to answer it, schools, will you guys be studying the impact of schools? We're already overcrowded. We know that. And the pundits will say, well, we've got some increased rooms being built. It's not going to keep up. Can it? There's not enough room. So projects like this, when they come on board, is that being calculated into the formula as far as school overcrowding goes?
I'll give a brief response. So those 3 topics, traffic, water, and schools, those would be analyzed in the EIR. For the specific question about the traffic model, I think we'd need to check with our traffic consultants and then would have to.
It's one thing to list the results of it. Can we see the formulas, how you got to those results?
Yeah, actually, we'll. That's a good comment. And we will describe the methodology used for each of those topics analyzed, so you won't have to guess at that. As we mentioned earlier, the city does have a newly updated computer traffic model that's citywide, prepared for the Burbank 2035 general plan that is nested or relates to regional traffic models. As you said, no projection's perfect, but what we're going to do is use the latest available tools, and we're going to we will disclose the methodology and all the information, so you can not only look at the answer, you, your planning board, your city council can judge the quality of that information and take that into account when they make a decision on whether or not to approve this project. Water, as I mentioned, every public water provider is required to have an urban water management plan that's updated every 5 years, that contains 20-year projections on the availability of water. They're required to take into account the reliability of outside water delivery. So all that information will be identified and included in the EIR for you and everyone else to review.
I had a question on massing and human scale at the ground level. Can we go back to the slide of the section? There you go. If you notice, the parking levels cantilever out over the sidewalk, and there's a non-native tree poking up over the 3rd level of parking, which is the 4th level of the structure itself. I think the massing should have been looked at in a much more sensitive way. You're down here on the ground level, and a person is walking in here, and this is supposed to be walkability. I also like to know the context of how people walk from this place to the nearest restaurants and so on down San Fernando, but that's another issue. It's kind of cumulative impact of walkability or not. So the way this is architecturally masked is really insensitive to the walking public at human scale. The only one I've seen in Burbank that had any semblance of sensibility was at Cypress and Third, and our marvelous city council, through their foresight, voted it down. And if they think this is appropriate, then I don't know if they have to vote on this. They have to vote on the EIR, but since they're not asking for any entitlements that go beyond the code and the zoning that they're complying with 100%, I don't know if anybody's going to have a crack at that.
Just briefly, your question regarding the approval process, the city council would need to consider a request for plan development and development agreements and development review to make a decision on this project. So the answer to your question is yes, the city council will review and vote ultimately on the project.
Believe it or not, I actually have something on the EIN, or EIR. You mentioned, or Tony mentioned earlier, about the water projections. It's going to be a water study, and that they do it for 20 years. Well, the last one that was done was woefully inadequate because we did not know we were going into a 5-year drought. And it was not only off, and I granted that no one expected a 5-year drought, but it did happen. And I don't know if there's anything written now that, because we as people seem to be very reactionary as opposed to proactionary. And is there anything written into that, designed into that, so if we go into another 5-10-year drought, that we have water?
Actually, the state water code recognizes the fact that we live in a semi-arid climate, so every one of those urban water management plans has to address several planning scenarios: normal rain year, single drought year, and multiple drought year. So state law already requires that multi-year droughts be addressed and considered in water planning, in these urban water management plans, and in review of projects. So yes, it is part of state law already.
All right, thank you. And the next question is actually very, very basic and very, very personal. During the construction phase, will there be sidewalk access? Because as you can see, I have a slight walking issue, and whether I'm going to Metrolink or someplace else, I like to take my scooter. And one of my biggest frustrations right now is they shut down the west side of San Fernando Boulevard due to the construction of IKEA. And you can't use that sidewalk to get by on. Yes, I know there's the other side of the street, but will this be affecting sidewalk traffic? Will there be sidewalk traffic? Are they going to shut it down altogether? And if they do, could they shut it down from the end of the street as opposed to the middle of the street?
Thank you. That's a good comment that we will consider and review, and we will need to check with some other city departments, Public Works in particular, to identify an appropriate solution to that issue.
Boy, that was a political answer. But
well, at this point,
there will be a solution to it. I just don't know the exact details right now.
Right, and again, we're probably too early in the game to address that, because as we get closer to it, I'm sure it's just for a concern personally, but not only for me. I also represent a lot of other individuals in the city that are disabled, that are blind, that can't walk, can't hear, and it's going to affect everybody. And one of the greatest frustrations on the whole San Fernando thing is you don't find out that the sidewalk is shut down till you've gone halfway. And if you're blind, it's even a bigger problem. And if you have other disabilities, you may sit there trying to figure out what to do. And honestly, I will tell you up front, I've gone into the traffic lane to complete getting around to, say, Verdugo. And it's not only not safe, it's extremely dangerous. Well, no, I'm sure there's some illegality there, so make sure that law enforcement doesn't see this tape.
Technical terms are using.
Yeah, well, we're trying to work around that. But it is a concern because people use the sidewalks a lot. We also have on the First Street and Verdugo, where this is going to be built, there are bus stops there. And from Mr. Cusimano's point of view, it's great for once it's completed, there'll be plenty of traffic. You'll be able to, let me rephrase that, that was a bad phrase. But pedestrians will be able to go out, catch the bus, or they'll be able to walk to the steakhouse, or they'll be walk to TGIF or whatever it is, and to the Comedy Store. But prior to that, if you're going to shut down something, my concern is you shut it down from the major street that accesses it, not mid-street. And that has been a problem due to the, what's the build? The big one? IKEA. Do the IKEA build. And now there's, I don't know what's going in right there on the corner of San Fernando and Verdugo, but they're doing the exact same thing. You don't know till you get there, and they've got it all blocked off. Sometimes there's a sign, usually there is not.
Thank you. That'll be something that we try to resolve sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Cusimano, you mentioned earlier you guys don't do condos, so I'm just curious, the whole time your Telaria website's been up, it's called Telaria Luxury Apartment and Condos. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I don't think that that is the website that I'm familiar with, because our website doesn't say that.
So you have no control or access in terms of input on that website, is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay. And in terms of cost, this fine young man back here, very highly intelligent young man, Oscar Gak, did I get it right? Gake, I'm so sorry, Oscar Gake. He wrote an article about your project, and he stated, Mr. Cusimano knows that there's a generational shift happening where millennials, which are the demographic which will most likely end up living in this building, are revolutionizing the way we get around and becoming less likely to own cars. Well, we know that's not true based on Bloomberg, and I have a tendency to believe Bloomberg over you for what it's worth. So given that there might be living there, you were also quoted during that presentation that he's quoting you from, of stating that the estimated cost per square foot would be $2.75 to $3 a square foot. That puts a one-bedroom apartment at $282 and change to $2,282 and change to $2,640. So I'm asking I want to hear it from him first, Oscar, then you can chime in all you want. So can you explain, and you also referred to that these will be, quote, these will be upper income apartments. So I'm a little disconnected on those between how millennials are going to be affording upper income apartments. You want to comment on that, please?
Is there a specific question?
I asked you to comment on
comment?
it. Yeah.
Maybe we're wrong. Maybe they won't rent, but we think that there is and will be demand for this type of quality housing in Burbank at those rates. Now, again, we could be wrong, and if we are, then it'll be a challenging project financially, but we think that they're
those of us
well-based.
who live here will have a 14-story unrentable complex to deal with. I'm having problems. I'm wanting to buy into what you're saying, but it's just not working for me, Mr. Cusimano. When I see things like how things got done with Telaria and your answers here, I'm having a real hard time struggling with it. I would very much appreciate if you could line item out why you think 154 14-story unit is best for Burbank, because I live here and I don't think it is. Instead of just reverting to that we disagree. So please tell me.
And we can have a difference of opinion.
Oh, one last thing. Go ahead, please.
As I indicated earlier, we think that this is the right size project for this site. We think that there's economies of scale, that when you have more units, you're able to have different amenities, more amenities and better amenities that are shared amongst the residents. And we looked at putting a significantly larger project here that had greater density, that would have maxed out the density in terms of what would be allowed under the transit bonus, and we chose not to. So can I give you a line-by-line definition? I don't really know what that means, and I can't do that. But this was the project that we brought forward that we felt was the appropriate size for this site.
You always come back with a retort that you could have gone for more. I'm not sure what the subtext of that means, but it seems to be a consistent pattern in your answers, and I don't know that I care for that either, quite frankly, because I think I know what the subtext is. In terms of affordable housing, here's from the Washington Post stating about how expensive cities making things more affordable, the gist of it being based on some more scholarly people, smarter than you and I will ever be, stating that building market rate units actually in highly sought after areas, such as Burbank, actually increases rents. So when you tell me that maybe the rents will be less, I'm thinking maybe there'll be more.
Thank you for that comment. Some of these questions may be difficult to answer now as far as rents and finance and economics, and we can have that conversation offline where we're better prepared to answer some of those questions. But right now, I don't think we have all the answers that you're seeking. Yes, sir.
I just want to be clear that the quote about the pricey apartments, I never made a quote about that. I think that was from the article in the Burbank Times.
I think I said you were quoting him.
Yeah, I know. I think that was from the Burbank Times, the quote. Okay.
Been patiently waiting.
No, that's okay. It's just a quick question. And I think I know the answer after what you just stated. Mr. Guzmano, David Spell, longtime resident. What I'd like to ask for the citizens is what's in it for the city as a whole, not the residents and the folks that will fill the retail spaces, hopefully. So is there any kind of examination that your folks have done that gives us a range of what the benefit to the city's roles will be, facing that $6 million deficit that we might have in 2020? I know you can't give us a number, but is there a range that your folks might have?
That's a great question, and I wish I would have thought to put something together ahead of time. So let me just backtrack a little bit. Burbank is facing a housing shortage. When you look at the increase in demand that's been projected, say, from over 2010 to 2020, as Burbank grows, hopefully in a balanced way, with new companies moving in, new businesses starting up, there is an increased demand for housing. I mean, that is what is projected, and that's what we believe, and that's what I think the market is demonstrating. And so, whether we like it or not, Burbank has to assume at least some marginal increase in housing. So when I talked about balanced growth, where you've got new companies moving in, new offices, studio jobs, hopefully some hotels and some retail, hopefully all these things kind of evolve with some sort of consistency. So there's got to be some additional growth. Now, reasonable people can disagree with that. Some people might say, you know what, no growth. And I can understand that, and I can respect their right to take that position. But I think that there is a large portion of the city of Burbank that wants responsible growth. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what my assumption is. And so there's got to be some growth. And so we talk about where do we want it? And I think that there's a large section of the community that wants to put responsible multifamily residential growth in areas that are close to transit, close to amenities, and far away from single-family homes. I think there's an element of Burbank that say if we need to grow some apartments, let's put it in areas that aren't going to be driving through my neighborhood. Let's put it in areas where people can walk to amenities. So, I think if you buy into that,
then you would look at this area and say, okay, we've got to have some growth. This is probably as good a place as any. Now, I honestly believe that when you look at the entire city of Burbank, there's very few places that offer a better location for multifamily growth than this. I honestly believe that. Again, reasonable people can disagree. So that's the reason and the premise that we started on this site for this type of growth. Now, we say, what does that do for the city of Burbank? Well, if we can grow the housing base reasonably, we offer housing to people that doesn't exist today. The fact of the matter is that a lot of people, especially people that are looking for a certain type of housing, something that's different than what was built in Burbank in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, now are on Olive Avenue going over the hill into Hollywood every day because they can't find what they need in Burbank. I honestly believe that. I think that if you do the analysis, you'll find a lot of people have to drive out of Burbank to find housing. I think that if we offer housing opportunities in Burbank responsibly, that we can actually reduce traffic going out every night and coming in every day. You may not agree with me. Reasonable people can disagree, but I honestly
Probably
think...
take a while, but...
Nope, that's what I believe. Let's look at the economic benefits, because that's important, because I quoted, Burbank is going to have a shortfall. We have infrastructure demands to meet. We have an unfunded demand for infrastructure, right? We have an unfunded salary gap for retirement and benefits and pensions. And it appears now that we're going to have an operating gap. So those are three holes that need to be filled. And what does the city do going forward? Well, one option is to cut services. And you can cut services. That means you close parks earlier, you lay off policemen, you lay off firemen, and you can close the gap that way. Or we have to find a way to increase revenues. I mean, there's no magic to it. You either cut expenses or increase revenues. Now, there's three ways that the city generates revenues. Their share of the property tax increment, transit occupancy tax, and hotel fee, basically fee income, which is primarily hotel tax. I mean, those are the sources that the city has. It doesn't own oil wells. It doesn't have the ability to generate income through other ways. Those are the three main ways. And so when you have projects like this project that is large, it will take a piece of land that is paying a relatively small tax, and it will pay a very, very substantial tax.
Could you give me just I know there's a two-story building on there, and we're talking about 214. Just general numbers, we will not hold you to them.
So
an idea.
The differential on an annual basis for the property taxes that are paid today versus when this project is complete is somewhere in the range of $2 million per year. Now, if this is a hotel, it will pay transit occupancy tax. It's 10% of the gross. It's a big, big, big number. That's several $100,000 per year. And one of the reasons that the city likes to see hotels is the transient occupancy tax is very, very lucrative. So those are the types of, now, when these projects go through the process, some people think that they don't pay their fair share, that they don't pay for the infrastructure that they incur. But I think that if you actually look at these projects on a project-by-project basis and see the fees they pay, now for Telaria, which is a project that has been cited here recently as a project that's under construction, our payment of fees and costs that are related to the public requirements are over $5 million in 1 year. That project will generate over $100 million in public revenues over, say, the first 40 years of its life. That's money that goes in. Now, one project isn't going to fill this whole gap, and I don't think it should be expected to. But if you have well thought out, reasonable development that is located in the right place, that contributes a tremendous amount of money back into this economy. So is this going to fix everything? No. But if we think that this is a good place for apartments, I mean, it's clearly this is a better place to put apartments than putting them up on the hill. It has access to transit that very few other sites really have. So if we're going to put apartments in Burbank, we suggest that this is a great location to do it, and that this will produce significant revenues to the community.
I saw one question here.
I have a question about this first drawing right here, this corner building. Where is that? I mean, which,
First and review.
yeah, like this corner building, because it's just 12 stories, right?
So let me orient you. If you were standing on First Street at the corner of the Olive off-ramps where Black Angus is, on Angelina, say you're standing on First Street and you're going to cross First Street along Angelino. Okay? So you're standing here and you're looking at the corner of Tahunga and First Street. And right now, there's a 2-story brick building on this corner.
Okay, so that's Tahunga.
This is Tahunga. This is First Street, and this is Verduzco. So this is just from,
Biersch is behind the building, correct?
yeah, right, yeah, Gordon Biersch would be back there.
So is that 12 stories on that building?
Dana, yes, 12 stories.
So the office was just 12 stories?
12 stories, yes.
But you know, the office floors are a little taller than the floor to floor of the hotel, so they're ostensibly the same height.
Okay.
The building on the end and the building on the far end are the same building, just different. The one on the
Hotel.
right is office, this is hotel, and phase 1 is in the center, is that correct?
That's correct. You got it.
Okay, one more.
Just one more. Michael, and I promise I'll leave you alone. In terms of using all the reasons why you think this is right for Burbank, which I disagree. I think it should be half that size, and I think the math models would validate me equally as well, depending on projection, how the projections are being stacked, the same as you're trying to say that they would for you. But we really, neither one of us can really prove that, can we? But anyway, enough of the diatribe. The question is to you. Like San Francisco is a good model, even though it's a huge city, and it's by no means Burbank, which is a suburban community that's attempting to be urbanized, versus a city that's trying to keep up. There, they have approximately, like last year, 3,500 units built, but they had like 50,000 new jobs coming in. They're never going to get caught up. Do you think we're ever going to get caught up here? Given that, yes or no, do you think we'll ever get caught up here? And you're certainly, please tell us why, your answer. But as a result of that, the density is going to be an issue. It already is an issue. We all know this. This is why I'm here. It's not about development. I'm not anti-development. I'm about anti-density and losing my quality of life. That's what I'm about, or diminishing my quality of life because of people like you. So given that, why does it have to be 154 at 14 stories? I just, please, because you're going to be hearing a lot about you. It's just not going to be me. There's going to be a lot of us out there wanting to know that. Why does it have to be so big? And then the next one, and then the next one. I know you're going to say because of the rail system that's not working yet, it's not developed yet. I know you're going to say because of the jobs, we're never going to catch up with the jobs. That's being proven nationwide. So it's like straw man arguments that, quite frankly, hurt the credibility of the overall concept you're trying to sell us. Why? Why about that, please?
So I agree that we can go back and forth, and it's quite frankly, it's a circular argument. You say it should be half as big. The same argument would be, well, why should it be 77 units? This is a number of units that supports the amenities that we want to include. It's a number of units that is well less than the demand that exists. There's a great unmet demand, and so an argument could be, why not more units? And
because of density issues. We already have issues with density.
And I agree. And you know what? Reasonable people can disagree. And we think.
I live here. You don't.
And you know what? And so maybe the project doesn't get approved. I think that the project gets approved because it has an overwhelming value. Is there a concern about density? Yeah, that's one of the issues that will be looked at in the environmental impact report. Both you and I are speculating on the impacts it will have in terms of traffic. Because
my speculation is based on past experience, kind of like stock market.
Well, as I said, the purpose for this meeting is for the scoping study, and I think that the environmental impact report is obligated to look at all of these issues, and I think we'll both be better informed having had a chance to look at that.
All right, one last question? Okay, here we go.
I promise I'll shut up. And this should be really simple. This should be really simple to figure out, because I'm trying to figure out if I'm looking at an optical conclusion on my part, or if this really exists. Right here, that looks like a walkway over Verdugo. See right there? Or Tahunga. Is that a walkway over the street?
No, it's just the graphics.
All right, because I wanted to know if it is, where does it connect to and what's going on there? Thank you.
You know, the only thing I wanted to say in defense of Michael Cusimano and the Cusimanos, they office across the street from this project, and I guarantee you, at least 2 of them are going to have in-house units in that building when it's finished. I promise you.
Yes, sir.
I'm a resident of Burbank, and that's a parking, well, one of them is a parking lot. They don't need it. Okay. I'm a resident of Burbank. I like the project. As I understand, our regulatory things says that the city of Burbank needs to be prepared to build to house 120,000 people. I think that's part of the 2035 plan. Is that not correct?
That sounds about right. I would need
Yeah.
to double check the numbers, but that's...
And it's going to go up again the next time we do the plan. So we take density in an area that does not affect a residential neighborhood. All we can do is control what we have before us right now. And I think it's a good project, whether it be a hotel or an office building on phase 2. So you're not and I think there are other residents who would support where that is being built as a positive thing for our community, so that we do have alternative housing for people to come in and as lifestyles change. So I think good project.
I'm Craig Hampel. I'm a resident here in Burbank, and just for the sake of telling, I also work with the city of Burbank. I'm a city employee. I really love the conversations around growth and what growth means. Is it quality or is it quantity? And I love the street view here because it shows so few cars. But actually, it would be great to actually look at how we could mitigate some of these things, because it is a lot of parking. It's a big space. It's going to add traffic. And can we see, more pedestrians on those streets and how that might work? Can we get some bike lanes in there? Can we work with our transportation management organization? In other words, can we look at this, at the function of the building through time and look at covenants of some of the tenants? Can we create incentives for fewer car ownerships? Can we incentivize using mass transit? Can we, put our TMO really on steroids and really work at that? Because as we develop more, we're going to see more impacts. And I think the biggest impact that everyone talks about is traffic and transportation, how we get people to move from place to place. So, as part of that environmental impact report, can we show the operational, kind of glide path over decades, and how we can actually bring those numbers of single occupancy vehicles down, and show, that transit and bicycle and walking, those plans, how can we bring those up? That, to me, means, livability. Other cities are also looking at things like reserves. If you raise the density in some areas, then can you preserve other areas? Can we put efforts into some of the other park spaces so that they get improvements? Can we look at the LA River is going through a big redevelopment now. Some cities have agricultural preserves so that we know that we have food going forward. There are a lot of ways to offset these things. Maybe it's not directly at the site itself, but, last year I was up in Portland. What they did was they gave density going vertical for more open space on the ground. And is that a possibility, to show some open space right there at the site where we have, gathering places for people and things like that? So that's it.
Thank you for that comment. TMO, for those of you who don't know what TMO stands for, is Transportation Management Organization, and there is a TMO in Burbank, and it includes elements such as bike parking, use of transit, use of carpooling, other opportunities for transit or transportation that don't entirely rely on the automobile. So elements of the TMO will be included in the project.
Just one last comment, and then I'm done. I've lived in cities that grew 120,000, and most of that was done by growing outward, incorporating, and going out horizontally. And it actually worked for the most part. Not great, but it kind of worked. And I've lived in one city that grew straight up, like what Mr. Kusman is proposing with us, because we are landlocked, 120,000, and I didn't want to live there anymore. That's when I would want to move, Mike, to Chatsworth or Malibu.
Well, then you get your state government, which is causing our regional governments to create that kind of a number for us. Because I agree. I think I'd rather leave our city as it is. But there's a state mandate for us to have, and that's what they did with their rezoning, was to give the density into those areas so that it does not affect the R1 neighborhoods that currently exist.
I don't
So
have
that
access
comes
to
from
them, sir.
that comes from
I have
the
access to
state
these
government,
people.
and that comes from the regional government.
Okay.
SCAG, I believe it is.
Okay, thank you. If you think of comments after this evening, there are these comment forms available at the back that you can take with you. Again, the deadline to submit written comments is April the 13th. And with that, we will conclude the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening.